Hello, I'd like to welcome you to Uncle David's Tales of the Forgotten, the USA's Inexcusable War on Pain Patients. On this program, I will be interviewing patients who've been harmed or families of patients who've been killed by the unscientific, unnecessary, and inhumane opioid restrictions that have plagued the country since the 2016 CDC clinical practice guidelines for prescribing opioids for pain was published. In my view, that was an ultra virus publication out of the bounds of the authority of the CDC, but that's a whole nother rabbit hole we won't go down today. And the reason for doing these interviews is to begin to document the fact that these harms and deaths are being directly caused by government policy, because we have professionals inside the health agencies and their advisory committees who have not acknowledged that these harms and deaths are happening. And we need to push them. In fact, I just filed a congressional inquiry request to ask about why the health agencies have not tracked patient outcome, even though the Department of Health and Human Services reported in 2020 to Congress in a report mandated by the Support Act that this should be done. In fact, I'll share the screen right now. So this is the report in which the Department of Health and Human Services reported that they needed, before they implemented any prescribing guidelines or restrictions, that they needed to track patient outcome. We'll come right down here to page 26. And I'll put a link in the show description for anybody who wants to read that document. So the recommendations came out from the CDC after a very long, multiple years coordinated effort, which began inside the health agencies. And it involves DEA agents and CDC agents and other people inside the health agencies and on their advisory committees. They had been being advised by a particular group called Physicians for Responsible Opioid Prescribing, which is a very anti-opioid group of addiction psychiatrists who have not even treated pain in the first place. And that their president is also the president of the American Society for Addiction Medicine, another very anti-opioid group of addiction psychiatrists who have basically destroyed pain care in the United States. If you are a chronic, intractable, trauma, cancer, palliative care, hospice, or surgical pain patient in the US, you're not getting your pain treated. We have had, an estimated 50 million people with what's called high impact chronic pain that prevents them from performing the most basic activities of daily living, dumped off their pain medications or force tapered to the point where they can no longer function, and untold amount of deaths. I estimate that hundreds of thousands of people have died as a direct result of these interventions. And that comes from an estimate from the legal notice that I filed with Department of Health and Human Services in April of 2025, which remains unacknowledged today. I can put that link in the show notes too, maybe on a different broadcast. Well, maybe we can look at it today. We'll see. I've got it pulled up here. So anyway, the point of this program is to begin to interview these patients, to begin to document the harms and deaths that are happening, so as to push the government to go ahead and begin to track patient outcome and count the number of deaths that have happened, so that we can create policy change. And then the other purpose of this channel is to raise public awareness about what's happening, because most people don't know unless you show up in the emergency room with some kind of problem that's painful, and they tell you, oh, you're just a drug seeker, you don't know that this is happening. So we need public outrage, and we need everybody to contact their representatives to demand change. Yeah, it's a lot. I think that's the most important thing about this channel. We'll be doing deep dives into documents, the players involved, the policies, how we got here. But there's so much to cover. We'll be doing that in little bite-sized pieces throughout the episodes. And I'll have a special guest who will be doing a complete series with me, who collected information and documents and depositions and court records and press releases and all kinds of things as they were happening over the years, since I think she started in 2014. So that's going to be an incredible series for us to look at. How did we get here, right? Whose idea was this? Because patients receiving treatment for their intractable pain have not been a causal factor in this publicly declared emergency with an opioid crisis. Because we know, and the government knew, and that in about 2010 to 12 era, the amount of deaths involving any prescription opioid had been low and stable, and that the parabolic rise in the number of deaths that you see on the graphs is caused from illicit fentanyl analog compound poisonings, not people in pain treatment. And let's talk about fentanyl for a second. The fentanyl on the street is not pharmacological grade fentanyl that's used in medical settings. It's made of different compounds with different molecules that attach to the fentanyl in doses that should never ever be used in the human population. And it's also mixed with other compounds, and that's why it's harming and killing people, because it's not pure. The dose is not stabilized. People don't know what they're getting. They don't know what's in it, and they take it, and here you go, it kills them. So this has all been lumped together in this word called opioids, that the government continues to perpetrate the lie that prescription opioid medications were the cause of the opioid crisis, which is completely false. There's no evidence that this is true. And we'll dive into that. That's a rabbit hole for another day. So the opioid restrictions now, where people have been force tapered involuntarily to a lower dose than what's therapeutic that helps them, or have lost access completely, this causes harm. There are known risks associated with losing access to your pain medications, including the loss of pain control, obviously, complete loss of functionality and the ability to perform basic activities of daily living, getting up, walking, toileting, dressing, meal prep, feeding yourself. And it causes complete medical condition collapse. It can cause medical complications. It can cause excessively high blood pressure that does not respond to blood pressure medication, which then in turn can cause heart attacks. I think people dumped off their pain meds or force tapered have a 30% more risk of heart attack and 20% more risk of stroke. And suicides. There's a study right now happening at the University of Alabama about patients who elected to leave the physical body because of untreated pain, or that they had been force tapered or lost access to their pain medications. So we can talk about that study in a different program, and I can send you to that study at the university if you or someone you love lost their life. If a family member or someone you love lost their life, you can participate in that study. Now, I have to be really careful and not name medications by name. So we'll call them on this program the controlled medications that shall remain nameless that are used to treat pain. So as to avoid censorship, because the terms of service of these platforms is that you cannot encourage the use of medications. And we're talking about completely clinically indicated medical treatment here. That's all. So I guess I'll move along and introduce myself, because the guest patient today is going to be me. I'm 62. I'm a scoliosis patient who was found to have S-curve scoliosis. I'll have a slideshow to show you in a minute of my imaging. I had the first surgery at age 16 in 1979 with a Harrington rod implant and this row of hooks on a little torsion device that they help counteract rotation of the vertebrae in the rib cage, right? So they're squeezing. And that came with thoracic spine fusion of the entire thoracic spine, T1, all the way to the bottom of thoracic. At the spinous process, they did little matchstick fusions. So my disc space or vertebrae is not fused, but just at the back where the little parts of the vertebrae come out like that, they fuse those. And then that was in June 1979. I was back in high school in the 11th grade at the end of that summer, marching in the band after school started, after Labor Day. Yeah, in those days, school never started till after Labor Day. We should make that a law again. And then had no appreciable treatment really after I recovered. Then I continued to school, worked and put myself through college, and that took 10 and a half years because I was working. And I took a job in California when I was 36 years old, and that was the first time I ever lived in a walking city, having to walk and catch the train and catch the bus and be on your feet all the time. And I had began having some problems in my low back in probably the mid 90s after sitting at a desk for years and years performing work. And I had two jobs for a long time because my mother got sick right when I graduated college, and I had to take two jobs to manage the bills and take care of her. But it wasn't until 2005, maybe 2004, when I had a surgery in the emergency room. I showed up in the emergency room in October 2004 in Long Beach, California, with an attack and had my gallbladder out. So while I was in the hospital for that and hooked up to the IV with the little button that you push, I realized that I didn't have any back pain. And I was like, oh, well, I wonder if this is what it must be like for people who don't have any pathology in their back. And since I had tried to manage my back problems all these years, you know, between the first surgery and when I was 16. And so now at this point I was 40, more than 40, and I had always used over the counter and heating pads and whatever I could do to manage it, and special office chairs. And one of the chairs, you kind of kneeled on it. It was the latest fad at the time, and it had a seat for your booty and pads for your knees. So I really didn't have any other treatment all those years. And after that hospitalization, began to seek treatment because I realized something's really wrong. And so then that started a 4.5-year journey of all the conservative care and diagnostic workup to find out what's wrong. And then, well, in 2008, I had a diagnostic test called a CT myelogram. And that is where they inject dye into the space where your spinal cord is running, in the space inside your vertebrae, there's a circle hole about that big, and the spinal cord runs through there so that they can see what's happening. Well, they accidentally punctured my membrane that holds the spinal cord. And this happens far too often. And especially, women giving birth, they do epidurals, and this accidental punctures will happen, and then they develop problems because this causes you to leak out all your spinal fluid, and then you get the massive headache and collapse. And then I had to be hospitalized over the weekend after that test was performed and get what's called a blood patch, where they take your own blood and inject into the space to get the platelets to seal up the hole so your spinal fluid will not continue to leak out. And that scar tissue will cause something called arachnoiditis, which is an inflammatory condition of the nerves in the very base of the spine. Well, I already had arachnoiditis because it was found out the lumbar disc in my lower spine, which were also twisted on each other and curved. The disc spaces had all become desiccated over the 30 years in between the last surgery, and now it was 2005 now, or 2008 when I was having this test, almost 30 years. So the bones were on top of each other. This was causing spinal cord crush and nerve root crush injuries, and I already had the inflammatory condition called arachnoiditis. And the puncture just sealed the deal. And in 1991, I had a raging case of, in those days, it was called mono, which is caused by Epstein-Barr virus. And recent research has found that Epstein-Barr, which is this little microscopic parasitical organism, will attack damaged nerve tissue and connective tissue. So people with certain conditions are really at risk by Epstein-Barr virus because it will turn around and attack. And arachnoiditis is one of those, and nerve tissues anywhere in your body, it will attack them. So arachnoiditis basically had every risk factor there is. So, and it causes a lot of pain. I have what's called cauda equina syndrome. So the very base of your spine into your tailbone, where the ends of the nerve roots are dangling down in there, start to stick to the membrane, causes extreme pain across my bottom. I can't sit very long. I'm having raging pain throughout my pelvic floor today. Actually, today's been a horrible day. Neuropathy all the way down my legs. I had a EMG test that showed that the nerve response in my legs was normal, go figure, because the nerve roots were all crushed. So anyway, the surgeon, what ended up happening was he proposed a surgery of lumbar pedicle screw fixation. He had to remove part of my Harrington rod, do the lumbar cage, well, just pedicle screws, not a cage, and it's all bolted into the back of my pelvis. So I have these enormous screws in the back of my pelvis, and one of them wasn't really placed properly and has been migrating out. So that's been like a big ice pick stabbing me. For 15 years, I put up with that. If I move a certain way or sit down and lean on it or bump it, wow. Yeah. Thankfully, in the past, I would say 6 months, that has really calmed down. So I guess the bone has finally sealed around that screw so that it's not jiggling anymore. But I still have residual pain from the waist down. So that surgery was performed January 8, 2009. That's when I became an opioid dependent patient, taking the medications that shall remain nameless, right? And have taken them ever since. And I received good pain care. That's when I became disabled. I was declared disabled by Social Security. My job terminated me. I moved from the coast At the end of that year to Palm Springs, transferred my pain care to Palm Springs, no problem. Then I even spent 2 years in Texas because my mother needed help. I had to go help her with some surgeries and financial drama. So I transferred my pain care to Dallas, Texas, no problem. Returned to California in 2015, transferred my pain care back, no problem. And had never even heard of the 2016 CDC guidelines, did not know any of this was happening until 2022 when it happened to me. What happened was we lost our lease in Palm Springs. Suddenly I couldn't afford housing in California anymore after the price run up that began in about 2019. So here it was 2022 and the rents had doubled. So we went all the way back to North Texas. My mother had been living with me full time since 2016. And I thought I would transfer my care right back to Southwest Pain at Presbyterian Hospital where I had been treated before. And instead, what happened was when we got there, turns out the Texas Medical Board in this interim period had gone completely crazy, run all the pain doctors out of the state, made them retire, and almost outlawed oral medications to take for chronic intractable pain. And the only things they were offering was the patch of the medication that's used to treat substance use disorder. Well, I don't have substance use disorder. I have intractable pain. And I didn't know what this medication was, or that you should never take it because it rots your teeth and it is not effective for pain. So I played the game and took the patch for 10 weeks. It did not control my pain whatsoever. It did not control my withdrawal symptoms. I had new pain that I've never had before at surgical sites where I had recovered completely decades earlier. So I fired that doctor after 10 weeks because he wasn't listening to me. And then I found a cash pay only doctor who allowed me 2 Percocet per day. So now I've got complete withdrawal from being on these medications for 14 years, no support, no treatment, and am fortunate to have survived that because many people do not. And many people decide to exit the physical body because they can't deal with their pain. So that's when I started networking with other patients and advocacy groups and started researching to find out what was going on. And that's when I began to learn about all of the restrictions that had happened and all of the state and federal laws that came in an avalanche after the CDC guidelines were published, and became an accidental pro se litigant trying to litigate my own Federal Tort Claims Act, which was dismissed ultimately because the government agencies have immunity, go figure. Yeah, it's a mess. Here, let me bring up the slideshow of my imaging so that you can see. How do we share that screen? Okay, imaging. Okay, share. I have to start it. Okay, sound off. Okay, unexpected error. No, we don't want unexpected errors. Here, let me refresh that. Okay. Oh, no, we don't want the sound. Okay, here we go. So we're going to add to stage. Okay, that should be going. It's going to display images. There's my lumbar pedicle screws and the ones in my hip. There's a side view of the pedicle screws. So yeah. Oh, there's the Harrington rod from the side view. They removed part. Okay, there's the pedicle screw that is emerging from my left hip. And there's a hole, well, from my mid-thoracic down. Wow. Yeah, so I became an intractable pain patient dependent. I mean, I literally depend on these medications to keep me alive. And so during the period when I was networking and learning about what was happening, I learned that in Arizona, where I live now, a state law was passed in 2022 that exempted intractable and cancer pain patients from dose caps. So I found a patient, found a doctor, got an appointment, made arrangements to move here, and got my pain medicine restored, but not all of it. They won't prescribe extended release medication, and they have a dose cap. He was affiliated with a hospital system that's enacted a dose cap of 50 morphine milligram equivalents, or MME. So that's about half what my usual therapeutic dose was. So I've been struggling for 3 years. I struggled. I was unable to continue my part-time work. I had to file bankruptcy. I mean, it just completely upends your whole entire life, like turns it upside down. So when we moved in December 2025, we had to move again because the home we lived in was sold out from under us. Now I've moved into a brand new construction home where they all are just for rent. You can't purchase the homes in the subdivision. So we will never have a home sold out from under us again. Wow, it was so disruptive and so horrible. That's another rabbit hole for another day. But I changed doctors in January after we moved in December 2025 because another patient here locally believed that at the clinic where he went, they would restore my extended release medication and my full equivalency dose. Well, that hasn't happened yet, although I did get a small increase. So now I have 2/3 of what's considered my normal therapeutic dose. But without a long-acting extended release medication, every day I wake up and feel like a dead body emerging out of the crypt, right? I mean, it's just horrible. I'm having a hard time sitting today. Sorry for being squirmy. So this week I have an appointment with a place that does pain and palliative care, and I hope they take me, and I hope that they solve this problem for me. So because I need to find some way to replace that lost income and find a way to alleviate the symptoms that keep me in bed most of the time. I can't even walk and do my household duties, and it's just paralyzing. It's torture. How we describe it is torture. I call it the state sanctioned pain patient torture and mass murder program. In fact, if you go follow me on Twitter, I'll put my Twitter X handle up there, David E. Smitty. We have a growing community there now and are organizing, and it's a good place to find out what's happening. I always post documents there, keep updates about my legal tactics there. So yeah, and that's a good place. In fact, in the show notes, if you don't want to come on Twitter and find the advocacy groups, I can point you to the advocacy groups in the show notes where you can get help, ask people questions. On this channel, it's just me, myself, and I don't have the bandwidth to answer, bunches of emails. I try to help when I can, but it's just not possible. I will give an email address in a little while where you can write if you want to be considered to be a guest on the program because you've been harmed or your loved one passed away because of these restrictions and were force tapered, or maybe they had surgery and they were not even given pain medication. We had a heart patient have emergency open heart surgery, and it was a Tylenol only hospital, and he never left the hospital. His blood pressure exploded the surgical site and he died. So, these restrictions have real life consequences, and the health agencies have to step it up and begin to assess and tabulate the numbers of people who have died and the kinds of harms that have been caused to people, like need torture, bankruptcy, loss of income, loss of functionality, health complications. They need to tabulate these things. In fact, I have asked them to create a website modeled after the vaccine adverse event reporting system so that patients can go there and report harms, but they haven't done it. So I may have to ask a judge to do it. I'm almost ready to file a lawsuit, which is based on a document I filed a year ago under the Administrative Procedures Act that Department of Health and Human Services has ignored. They won't even give us anybody trying to approach them for policy change or anything. We are ignored, flat ignored. Most recently, a congressman attended I won't call it a rally, but it was a meeting that Doctor-Patient Forum had in Atlanta. And that is the first time we have ever had a politician or appointed official inside the government admit on stage, on video, that these restrictions are causing harm to patients. So I hope that he goes to Congress and we get some change going on here, because this is shameless. This is all unnecessary. Everything the government has told us about these medications is a lie. Okay? Everything. Their own data does not even support their claims. And we're going to be doing deep dives. I'm going to be pulling up the documents, showing how their statistics were polluted, showing how their own data doesn't even support the claims they're talking about. They say these medications have a very high risk of addiction, when the rate of addiction for patients treated with these medications that shall remain nameless to avoid censorship, if they're a chronic pain patient or they go have surgery and they're prescribed these medications, is about 1 patient per 1,000 treated, which is far less than 0.25%, right? So where is the highly addictive? Where does that come from? Addiction is not caused by mere exposure to a substance. It's caused by the person's mental state, psychosocial factors, socioeconomic factors, personal responsibility. Nobody's forcing the pills down people's throats, right? We have to stop this eliminating personal responsibility for abuse and misuse, because another reason why their claim of it's so highly addictive, these claims are just meaningless, because they have never given us the number of patients who were treated successfully with these medications after they had surgeries. Like, I had 8 major surgeries over the course of my life and was treated appropriately and took my medicine and recovered and stopped taking them and resumed my life and went back to work. The end. And so did millions of patients. Well, they have not counted or compared, what's the comparison between the successful number of treatments against the little few people who misuse and abuse. So this idea that they are so addictive that 1 pill and you're hooked for life, this is just a complete nonsense lie. It just boggles the mind. So the propaganda's been really thick, and we have to start fighting back against the propaganda here. It's just got to stop. Wow. Okay, well, obviously I'm having pain and I am not doing well today, and I have something to do in 45 minutes here. So I'm going to put the email address where you can send me an email if you would like to be considered to be a guest on the program, to tell us about your harm or the death of a loved one that was directly related to them being force tapered off their pain medication, or dumped off, or maybe they were denied medication in the emergency room or surgery, and this caused additional problems. So I'm looking for stories of persons harmed by the restrictions. And you can send email to thepainlawsuit@proton.me. And I'll try to schedule you and we can talk about it. Now, you can remain anonymous and on audio only if you want to be a guest, especially if you're in treatment currently and don't want to stir the pot, or maybe there is some dispute with your treatment currently and you need to keep your identity hidden because some kind of process is happening. I get it. So yes, you can remain anonymous on audio only if you desire, with no names, and we never will mention the names of medications to avoid censorship. And if we talk about the persons who lost their lives because they elected to leave the physical body, that's what we have to say instead of the word that starts with S. These platforms and their censorship is just nuts. And those episodes will likely remain behind a paywall on my Substack account. I want to keep all of these free for people to see who want to see them. And I'm going to use my Substack account. And there will be tiers for if you can afford and would like to support this work. There will be tiers where you can sign up for monthly subscriptions, but I won't ask for that. It's available. Yes, I'd love your support because that will help me continue to do these episodes and document these cases, but it's not going to be required. I may try to go on Rumble also to do what do they call it? Ad revenue sharing or whatever it is. If the patient agrees to allow me to do that, to raise money, to help me continue to do these programs and the legal work that I do, right? In a different program, we can talk about the notice I filed last April that has been ignored, and then it is ready to proceed to district court. Well, I can't find legal representation because no attorney will touch the subject with a 10-foot pole. And I don't think I have the bandwidth to prosecute a case of this nature by myself. So I need legal representation on a pro bono basis. I'm going to call the local law school and ask them, but we need a law firm to step it up here to help protect the patients who are literally being tortured and killed by U.S. government policy, which is unlawful, by the way. Federal interference with the practice of medicine is prohibited by 42 USC section 1395. And the only thing that allows them to do these things is the Public Health Emergency Declaration, which I have asked Department of Health and Human Services to review and correct, and have been ignored. And so that's what I'm going to take to district court now. I would prefer to have a law firm to help me. I do not want to have to be doing this by myself. I can barely keep up with the responsibilities in the household that I have now with my elderly mother living with me. So anybody who needs, who knows an attorney, please send them my way. Is that the point? I was gonna, yeah, in another show, we can talk about that notice that I filed and what the next steps are that I plan to take. Okay, well, that is the introductory episode then to Uncle David's Tales of the Forgotten about the U.S. government's inexcusable war on pain patients, where we're going to interview patients harmed and families of patients who've been killed by these restrictions that came out of the health agencies in response to advisory committees who gave them fraudulent claims about the medications that shall remain nameless. And that's where we're at. Pain care has been destroyed. They're throwing our doctors in jail. That's a whole nother rabbit hole, a whole nother subject and show. There's so many rabbit holes. There's a lot for us to cover in these episodes. going forward. So that introduces you to the show, and that introduces you to me, the first patient that's been harmed by losing access to my medication that shall remain nameless, which caused me to have no pain control, loss of functionality, loss of the ability to do my responsibilities and perform activities of daily living, loss of the ability to continue to earn money, bankruptcy. These are real harms happening to real people, and there are millions of us who take our medication as the doctor tells us, never have a problem, and we are being punished in a way that is frankly not excusable, if you ask me. Yeah, it's horrible. It's sick, horrible, and disgusting to deny a person that's in pain the only known technology that we have to relieve the pain and suffering of these patients is being withheld from them. For what? For fraudulent claims and outright lies that have been told because of this agenda to restrict access, to make it look like the government's doing something about all the people who are out there taking illicit drugs and dying from it. So that's where we're at. I shudder to think what's happening inside nursing homes and long-term care facilities, those poor people who have nobody to advocate for them. It makes me sick to my stomach. So I'm going to continue to fight this evil until the last breath I ever take. Okay? I appreciate you being here. Share this program far and wide. If you know someone who could be a special guest to tell the story of their harm, send them to the email address, thepainlawsuit@proton.me to consider to be scheduled on the show. Follow me on Twitter, David E. Smitty, and I'll let you go for today. Thank you for coming. Bye-bye.